From full-blown psychotic meltdowns, to getting jumped by other inmates, to attacking the guards with hot coffee, this is the brutal reality of school shooters once they're behind bars. Starting with the crybaby, Ethan Crumbley. Ethan Crumbley's time behind bars has been rough, and for someone convicted of murdering 4 classmates in cold blood, it isn't surprising. In November 2021, at just 15, Ethan carried out one of Michigan's deadliest school shootings. What's crazy is that his parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, also ended up behind bars right alongside their son. This was because they ignored every warning sign: Ethan's violent drawings, his disturbing journal entries, even his pleas for help. But if you thought that was brutal, wait till you watch him having a total breakdown. This was right on the day of his hearing. Ethan was on camera, strapped to a restraint chair in jail, thrashing under a spit hood and screaming at God for not stopping the massacre. He sobbed, shouted, and begged God to forgive him. This was the same person who had declared himself God in his manifesto just a day before shooting 4 kids. His psychologist called this a psychotic break. The prosecution wasn't buying all the crying, though. They pointed out that he meticulously planned his rampage, kept journals about killing, and tortured animals long before he opened fire at Oxford High. To them, the breakdown was not evidence of psychosis, but of a killer realizing the walls had closed in. Initially, Ethan was placed in a small youth unit at Thumb Correctional Facility, reserved for inmates under 18. There were fewer than 10 boys in the wing, each with his own cell, but required to share common areas during the day. Schooling was mandatory, with hours of study designed to push them toward high school equivalency tests. Even in this controlled setting, Ethan found himself in fights. He racked up 3 misconducts in less than a year, 2 for horseplay, and 1 for a violent clash with another 17-year-old. Life is brutal for a teen murderer in prison. He wasn't the dark demon figure he painted in his writings. Instead, he was reduced to a young man tied down, hooded, and crying while deputies stood by. When Ethan turned 18 in April 2024, he aged out of the youth unit and was transferred to Oaks Correctional Facility in Manistee, a maximum security prison for adult men. This is where things get serious. Unlike the easy structure of the juvenile wing, he is now going to live with hardened offenders, killers, gang members, and predators who won't hesitate to test him. When he was moved to the adult prison, Ethan broke down on camera again. Prison culture doesn't reward someone like Ethan. There are no tough points for shooting kids. His fellow inmates hate him even more for being a child murderer. His crime brands him as weak and detestable, the kind of inmate others target for extortion and violence. Ethan was 15 when he carried out his massacre in Michigan. It left 4 students dead and 7 others wounded. He entered the school hallways, armed with a semi-automatic handgun his parents had purchased just days earlier. Among those killed were Hannah St. Juliana, Tate Meyer, Madison Baldwin, and Justin Schilling. The attack wasn't impulsive. In journals, videos, and a manifesto written the night before, Crumbley revealed his mindset. He declared, "There is no God. I am the demon. I'm gonna open fire on everyone in the hallway." By the time police captured him, the damage was done. A boy who thought of himself as God is now just a teenager having a breakdown in prison. But if you thought Ethan's prison life was cruel, wait till you see the next one. Nicholas Cruz. Most people think that school shooters go into prison only to be targets, but that's not always the case. Some of them crack under the pressure, and instead of becoming the prey, they lash out at the people around them. That's exactly what happened with Nicholas Cruz. Not even a year after the Parkland massacre, where he murdered 17 students and staff with an AR-15, Cruz was already proving he couldn't handle prison life. In November 2018, during what should have been a routine recreation period at the Broward County Jail, he completely lost it. He was wearing his orange jail jumpsuit, flimsy shower slippers on his feet, just pacing circles around the tables. Sitting nearby was Sergeant Beltran, a sheriff's deputy assigned to keep an eye on him. Beltran simply told Cruz to walk properly in those slippers. Worried he'd trip or fall, that's when things went sideways. Instead of brushing it off, Cruz turned, flashed both middle fingers, and then suddenly charged. Despite his small frame, about 130 pounds at the time, he barreled straight into the guard, knocking him off his chair and flipping him onto the ground. What followed was a messy scramble. Cruz clawed at Beltran's belt and actually managed to yank the taser out of its holster. For a split second, the situation was deadly serious. Beltran feared Cruz would use the weapon on him and then do whatever he wants to me. Cruz did fire it. The taser discharged, but missed both men. Beltran fought back hard, wrestling control of the taser and landing punches that staggered Cruz. The guard finally got him face down, cuffed, and hauled back into his cell. cell. Beltran came out of it without serious injuries, but the fight showed just how volatile Cruz was behind bars. He isn't just another inmate lost in the system. He's one of the most infamous names in the country, and that means his prison life is full of heavy restrictions. Reports confirm he's in a maximum security environment, serving 34 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. For someone like Cruz, prison isn't about rehabilitation programs or second chances. It's about control, safety, and making sure nothing else goes wrong. So what does his day actually look like? Most mornings in Florida's high-security prisons start early, sometimes as early as 5 a.m., with guards flicking on lights and ordering inmates to get up. Inmates are counted, cells are inspected, and breakfast is served on trays through a slot in the door if you're in protective custody or solitary. That's probably where Cruz finds himself most days, either in protective custody, where he's kept away from other prisoners, or in what's basically solitary confinement. Prison officials know his crime makes him a target. Other inmates don't respect school shooters. In fact, they're often despised. To avoid violence, authorities keep people like Cruz locked down. His meals are the same as everyone else's: powdered eggs or grits in the morning, a cold sandwich for lunch, and a basic hot dinner like chili or beans. Nothing fancy and often bland. If he's in protective custody, he eats alone. Recreation time is scheduled, but for Cruz, that means maybe an hour a day outside in a small fenced-in yard under the constant watch of guards. He's not out mingling with the general population. Instead, it's just him pacing in circles, maybe shooting a basketball if the unit has one, or just staring at the sky before being shuffled back inside. Education and work programs exist in Florida prisons, but Cruz isn't a candidate for them in any meaningful way. His name alone would make it hard to put him in group classes or job assignments. That leaves him with long stretches of isolation. He may have books, maybe some TV if his custody status allows it, but the reality is his routine is monotonous. Wake up, eat, sit in a cell, exercise briefly, go back to the cell, lights out. Day after day. What makes his case stand out is that Cruz has already shown he doesn't handle prison pressure well. That assault on Sergeant Beltran in 2018 proved he's volatile, snapping over something as small as being told to walk properly in slippers. Because of that, guards will treat him as high risk. His movements are probably shackled, and he's escorted whenever he leaves his cell. Even a trip to medical or a legal visit likely means restraints and armed supervision. No friends, no gang backing, no tough points earned from his crime. Just a long, empty life sentence where every day looks the same and every guard's eyes are on him. But if you think that's a miserable life to live, you won't believe who we have next. James Holmes. If you thought you've seen the worst of school shooters getting attacked in prison, this is about to prove you wrong. James Holmes, the man behind the Aurora movie theater massacre in 2012, thought he was being kept under tight security. He was supposed to have zero contact with other inmates, but one slip-up by prison staff gave another prisoner the opening of a lifetime, and he took it. Holmes was being held at the Colorado State Penitentiary in Cannon City, locked down in a special unit, where interaction with anyone but guards was off-limits. That all changed on October 8th, 2015. Holmes was leaving his case manager's office when a sliding security gate was opened at exactly the wrong time. On the other side was Mark Daniels, a convicted car thief who had no intention of letting the opportunity pass. The officer escorting Holmes couldn't even call for backup because his radio battery had died. That's when Daniels made his move. He squeezed through the gate as it was closing and went straight for Holmes. Guards yelled, but it was already too late. Daniels swung wildly, landing punch after punch to Holmes's head and face, while officers tried to pull him back. Holmes was known for his wide-eyed, blank stares during trial, but he suddenly found himself on the receiving end of fists with nowhere to run. In the scuffle, a female officer even caught a couple of blows trying to break it up. What really set this whole thing apart was what came after. Daniels didn't just throw a few punches at James Holmes and move on. He doubled down and made it clear he had zero regrets. In fact, a couple of months later, he put it all in writing. In a letter to Denver's Westward newspaper, he basically bragged about what he'd done to the mass shooter. He wrote that he was so sorry he couldn't wipe Holmes out completely, that if it weren't for the guards pulling him off, he would have sent him packing to Satan's lake of fire. He admitted it was impossible to finish the job alone with so many officers piling on, but he still took pride in the fact that he got 6 or 7 good ones in before they dragged him down. He described Holmes as looking very scared during the attack. The reaction to the letter was wild too. The public actually supported Daniels. His commissary account started filling up with money from strangers who wanted to reward him for going after a mass shooter. There were even attempts to launch a site called James's Jailhouse Justice, turning Daniels into a sort of vigilante folk hero. That attack by Daniels didn't just leave James Holmes with a few bruises, it reshaped his entire life in prison. Before that day, Holmes was already kept under tight watch at the Colorado State Penitentiary. After the attack, officials decided Holmes could never be safely kept in Colorado. They quietly transferred him out of the state, refusing to reveal his new location. Even today, his exact prison placement is a closely guarded secret. Holmes now lives in extreme isolation, cut off from the general population almost entirely. Every move he makes is under escort, and every day looks the same. Wake up in a cell, eat bland meals, exercise alone or under strict watch, and go back to his bunk. Unlike other lifers who might find some routine or work inside, Holmes exists in a bubble built on protection. For him, prison isn't about serving time, it's about surviving as a permanent target. If you thought James Holmes had it rough when another inmate swung on him, wait until you hear about the next one. Dylan Roof, the guy who walked into a Charleston church on June 17, 2015, and murdered 9 people during a Bible study. He didn't even make it to trial without getting a taste of prison justice, and it happened in the most vulnerable place possible, the shower. Back in 2016, Roof was being held at the Charleston County Detention Center, isolated from other inmates because of how notorious his case was. He was supposed to be safe. But one morning, as he walked into the communal shower, another prisoner named Dwayne Stafford saw his chance. He bolted down the stairs, slipped past a guard, and went straight for Roof. Roof barely knew what hit him. Stafford pummeled him in the face and back, getting in a string of clean shots before officers pulled him away. Roof tried to fight back, but according to Stafford, it wasn't much. He later bragged he got 6 or 7 good ones before being dragged off, and even mocked Roof for looking terrified during the attack. For once, the kid who strutted into a church with a gun was the one caught off guard, cornered, and scared. What happened next was almost as wild as the attack itself. Stafford turned into a mini folk hero for some people. He bragged openly about what he did and even gave interviews on the attack. Money started showing up in his commissary account from strangers cheering him on. He said he wished he could have done more damage, but at least he got the satisfaction of landing those punches. Stafford later admitted he intentionally didn't use a weapon, only his fists, landing about 5 quick blows before officers restrained him. Roof was left with a bruised face, but refused medical treatment. Stafford never got convicted for his attack, and prosecutors later dropped charges against him for the assault. Of course, prison officials didn't let him walk away clean. He was punished with segregation, lost privileges, and eventually transferred out. Still, his words stuck. He had no regrets about attacking Roof, and saw it almost like payback on behalf of the victims. For Dylan, that incident set the tone for the rest of his time behind bars. It was a reminder that no matter how many walls, gates, and guards surround him, he'll always be a target. Prison culture doesn't respect child killers, church killers, or mass shooters. If anything, those crimes put a bullseye on your back. His daily life now is the exact opposite of freedom. He spends nearly all of his time in a tiny cell with limited human contact and constant monitoring. Meals come on trays, recreation is short and tightly controlled, and he has virtually no chance to interact with anyone who isn't a guard. The routine is monotonous. Wake up, eat, sit alone, maybe read or write, and then repeat the loop. But this next case is even worse, because this school shooter didn't just get attacked in prison. He got fatally attacked after being released from prison. John Romano. John Romano's life after prison hasn't exactly been quiet. He was responsible for the 2004 Columbia High School shooting, when he entered school with a shotgun and wounded a teacher. 2 decades later, he was released in 2020 after serving about 17 years of his 20-year sentence. Since then, he's tried to remake himself publicly. Mental health advocate, influencer, someone speaking out on gun violence and redemption, but his second brush with violence was a brutal sword attack, and it proved that prison life will follow you outside too. On August 29, 2022, Romano was working at a homeless outreach center in Albany, New York, when a man named Randall Mason attacked him with a sword. Romano was struck multiple times, arms, legs, and even his head. He was airlifted to the hospital, put on a breathing tube, and left fighting for his life. Doctors had to perform reconstructive surgeries to reconnect limbs and repair torn skin, with fears about long-term damage. The attacker later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the attack. Romano explained claimed that the attack started after he confronted Mason for making derogatory comments. Mason allegedly began ranting about white devils and grew increasingly hostile. Romano says he tried to have Mason removed, but before anything could happen, Mason snapped and launched the attack. From his hospital bed, Romano posted videos online, questioning how he was still alive after being injured so badly. Well, we're asking the same question. Since then, his public presence has exploded, especially on TikTok. Under the name John Seeking Peace, he talks about his past, his mental health battles, his remorse, and his efforts to prevent future school violence. His following has grown into the hundreds of thousands, but not without controversy. Many people argue a former school shooter shouldn't have a platform at all because it glamorizes his story or overshadows the victims. Others accuse him of softening the details of what he did. In a strange way, the sword attack flipped his story on its head. The man who once inflicted violence became the victim of it, and the scars he has remind him that violence doesn't always stay behind prison walls. Sometimes it finds you again. And finally, we have the story of Benjamin Hoffman, who went so crazy in prison, he started throwing boiling hot coffee on other inmates. Benjamin Hoffman. Benjamin Hoffman isn't just another name in the system. In Darwin, his name is tied to one of the worst shooting sprees in Northern Territory history. In June 2019, he went on a rampage that left 4 men dead and the community shaken. For that, he was sentenced to multiple life terms with no chance of parole. In other words, he's never leaving prison. But even inside prison, Hoffman has continued to make headlines, not for remorse, but for lashing out again. That moment came in November 2021 inside Darwin Correctional Center. Hoffman crossed paths with another inmate, Jason Doyle, and what started as tense words escalated into a full-blown assault. CCTV caught the whole thing. Hoffman walked up, holding a fresh cup of coffee, and deliberately threw it into Doyle's face and torso. The liquid scalded Doyle's skin, leaving him in shock. Hoffman later admitted he tossed the coffee but denied throwing punches. In court, Hoffman tried to spin the attack as self-defense. He claimed Doyle had insulted him the day before, calling him names and trying to bait him into a fight. The coffee was classified as a weapon, and the fact that Hoffman carried it over and used it in the heat of the moment showed intent. He was found guilty of assault and handed an extra 3 months. Well, he'll never see freedom anyway. Still, it officially marked him as violent inside as well as outside. What stood out in his testimony, though, was how Hoffman described himself. He called himself a broken man. He told the court he'd been attacked multiple times since arriving in prison, had been threatened constantly, and felt like he was always on edge. He linked the coffee attack to a trigger response brought on by PTSD, paranoia, and the trauma of his past. In other words, he painted himself as a victim. That mindset probably gives a glimpse of his daily reality now. He's in a maximum security environment, surrounded by inmates who know who he is, and many would see him as a challenge. Guards, meanwhile, treat him as high risk, both because of what he did on the outside and because of the trouble he's caused on the inside. He likely spends more time in lockdown, with heavy restrictions on who he can mix with. A typical day for Hoffman probably isn't that different from other lifers. Early wake-ups, bland meals, time in the yard under strict supervision, then back to a cell for long hours of isolation. But the tension is different. He's a man who knows he'll never leave, who carries the weight of 4 murders, and who now has a reputation inside as someone who will lash out with boiling coffee if pushed. That makes him a target in 2 directions: other inmates who want to test him, and guards who want to keep him contained. Prison isn't just punishment, it's a cycle of paranoia, minor conflicts, and the crushing reality of life without parole. And that is what happens to school shooters in prison. That's all we have for today. Which of these mass shooters would you take down in jail? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Criminal Corner so you don't miss the next ones.